the yearning that I've had for my own mother to truly see me, the desperate attempts I have made for my own mother to see me, to value me, like for her to truly, truly see me. Sometimes we just coexist without really seeing each other. And I think that has been the case with my mother. We coexisted and she took care of me. I never want to take that for granted, that my mother took care of me, put me through school, fed me, gave me shelter. Even at this point where I am an adult and I'm unemployed, my mother is still taking care of me. And I never want to take that for granted. But she never gave me what really mattered, which was her love, which was her full and complete attention, which was a mother's affection, a mother's compassion. That how sometimes when you're in a relationship, you want your partner to look at you in a certain way, a way that makes you feel like you're the only woman in the world and you're the only one that matters. That is also possible with a parent. Like a child can feel like they're so special because their parent makes them feel like that, especially a mother. Their mother makes them feel so special when the world is against them, when they go outside and they are bullied and they are teased and they are belittled and they are made to feel all types of negative emotions. But when you go back to your parents, when you go back to your mother, you feel nothing but love and you get her full attention and she makes you feel better. Granted, this isn't always the case. It's not always 100% that your mother will always be able to make you feel better, even if your mother is the most attentive and loving person. I understand that it is unfair to expect that from anyone, whether it be my husband, it be my sister, a friend. No one can always be able to make you feel loved or special. This is why I'm saying that now that I am an adult, it is also my duty to learn to appreciate myself, to love myself, because I can't expect that from another human being, that they can always 100% make me feel better or encourage me or make me feel loved. But a majority of the time, the people that we are surrounded with, those who are close to us, they play a huge role in really just making us feel good about ourselves. So, and I think I say this because I'm always just trying to answer my mother, because I always hear her saying to me, I am not perfect, because that has always been her stance. That has always been her defense, that I'm not perfect. I'm sorry, I'm not perfect. I can't be a perfect mother. And I'm saying this, that you can't expect somebody to be 100% to you all the time. That is why we also just have a duty. We owe it to ourselves to love ourselves to an extent that we don't become a burden to other people. Okay. But also, with that said, as a child, you are still learning to love yourself. You're still learning to validate yourself. So a lot of that will come from a parent. A lot of that will come from how your mother treats you. And because my mother lacked and failed to give me the validation that I still needed as a child, I now have more work to do, which I think is the case for a lot of people, because there are just unfortunately a lot of people who become parents and they're not ready and they haven't worked on themselves, they haven't worked on their own issues. Again, this doesn't mean that you become a parent when you are 100% perfect person, but it means you also have to be aware of your own insecurities, your own shortcomings, your own weaknesses, so that you don't spread that down to the next generation. You don't spread it to your kids. You don't take out your own stuff to your kids, which I think, because my mother has never been fully aware, in as much as I know she knows that there are some things that have hurt her, or perhaps even things that she has never dealt with. But because she hasn't been aware to an extent of wanting to deal with that stuff, praying about it, taking it to the Lord, asking for healing. Because here's another thing with believing in God that I've now come to realize. with God showing me that how much I've been hurt by my own mother and my own sister. It God God wants to take us through a healing process. He wants us to be willing participants. So sometimes we think God is just a magical God and he will just, you know, just take away the pain, instead of taking us through the healing process. And the healing process means crying. The healing process means reflecting, seeing your own mistakes if there were mistakes that you made, seeing other people's mistakes or how they've hurt you. So there's a process where you have to participate. And I think because my mother is a believer, a strong believer at that, she, I think in her mind, she just kind of assumes that because now it's in the past, and my mother is very big on the whole forgiving thing in a very unhealthy way. So for her it's just like forgive it, forgive them, whoever wronged you, forget about it and move on, instead of going through the healing process. Now obviously with some cases you can just quickly move on from a situation, or you can just easily forgive certain people or forgive a certain circumstance, because even circumstances, they need to be forgiven. Sometimes you went through a very trying time and you felt like it was unfair, the environment, the situation, whatever it may have been. So forgiving certain circumstances and people, and I think my mother never took the time to deal with certain things. Other things are easier to move on from, and perhaps they don't require a lengthy healing process. But I think there are just a lot of things that my mother has not taken the time to deal with. And I think her mindset has been that she's a believer, so she's not going to get stuck on what happened in the past. Her mindset is just forgiving whoever wronged her or forgiving certain circumstances in her life and simply moving on, instead of taking the time to reflect and admit her own mistakes, which is another very hard thing for my mother to admit where she is wrong. Because I often hear her when she speaks of stories of her past, or even with like her own family, my mother does a lot of pointing. This is who to blame, this is, they hurt me. And in as much as there is some truth to that, but we often have to reflect and see where we might have also made mistakes. And even if maybe we didn't make any mistakes and the other person was completely to blame and you did nothing wrong, there comes a time like where I'm at right now, where I'm saying I am an adult, and even if somebody had wronged me, and even if circumstances had been unfair, I need to now take ownership of my life, whether that's through the healing process of forgiving, of just rehabilitating myself, of now learning to mother myself, now having to listen to certain content or people that can help me through this healing process, reading scripture on the healing process that I'm at, crying out to God, praying to God, getting confused, because in the healing process sometimes you get confused and you feel like you're not going anywhere, but try again the next day. Sometimes you just get stuck in the crying phase. Sometimes you just get stuck in the anger. And then you try again the next day. It's not an easy process. It's really not. And I'm in the midst of healing from the fact that my mother has never really loved me the way that I should have been loved. I'm in that healing process and it's not easy. Some days I just wake up and I'm angry. Some days I just hate her so much. And for me, it's still so unbelievable because I adored my mother. I sucked up to my mother. I idolized my mother. She was my role model. She was my hero. Because as a single woman, she did it all by herself, raised us, was able to put food on the table no matter how hard it was. And it was hard. I idolized her. I looked up to her. And to suddenly really realize how much she hurt me and how much she didn't give of herself to me, it hurts. It hurts. And I think coming back home, in the last 3 years I've been home, it hit me harder because I came back to a situation that I think while I was away and not staying full time at home, I might have forgotten how bad it was. Because as a child, it didn't really sink in that I might have been emotionally abused, that I might have had a mother who's emotionally unavailable, a mother who's incapable of loving me and genuinely being there for me emotionally. And so coming back now as an adult, I think it hit me harder that things are still the same. I said in another episode that it hurt me to see my mother move from bad circumstances where she was always exhausted from working, and she was trying her best to make ends meet. She was stressed about money, she was stressed about what we're going to eat, how she's going to buy this and that. And I always use that as an excuse to say, oh, this is why my mother couldn't be there for me, because she was stressed, she was exhausted, a lot was going on. But it hurt me to see our circumstances change, whereby my mother got a more stable job, whereby financial circumstances got better, but still my mother was not there for me mentally and emotionally. I think that's why it finally dawned on me that there's definitely something wrong here, because now my mother is not always constantly stressed. If she is stressed about something, it's just something of a season more than at the time where there was constant stress and exhaustion from her working crazy hours. And it hurt me to see the progression of our lives whereby things became more stable financially, and still see my mother not be there for me, whereby she got a more stable job where she didn't have to work crazy hours, wake up in the early hours of the morning, but still have my mother not be there for me. And I think it started to sink in that it's not because at that time you didn't have money and she was super stressed, that's why she wasn't available for you. It's just because she's not available. Whether you live in a mansion or you live in a shack, she's just never going to be available, because there are mothers who live in a shack, one room house, wherever you call it, and they are able to love their children and be there for their children emotionally and listen to their children and truly see their children. Granted, there will be seasons for every mother where you are probably stressed about something, but it is just that, a season, not a lifetime of not truly being there for your child. And for me, with my mother, it has been a lifetime. In my lifetime, my mother has never genuinely been there for me. And it continues to be hard to accept that, but I think I'm now in the process of just kind of making peace with that, because fighting it and to keep on yearning and craving for my mother is hurting more. At this point, I am finding it more of a relief for me to not yearn for her love, to not want that from her, to not expect that from her. I'm finding that to be a relief. I'm finding that to be easier. I'm finding it better for me to function without me expecting my mother to be there for me fully. Whereas if I keep expecting that, it hurts more and more. So just the other day, I was actually listening to a podcast by Renika, who is my favorite when it comes to talking about narcissism. So she has a podcast called Mama Trauma, Daughters of Narcissists. And she speaks so well about it because she has experienced it. Obviously, anyone who has experienced something that you have experienced, they just understand, because everything that they say you can relate to. But what I love more about her is that she's a Christian based podcast. And just the other day, she posted an episode that I didn't think I'd be seeing, especially so soon in her. Well, it hasn't been quite soon, because she hasn't been in contact with her mother for 2 years. But I only discovered her podcast this year. So it actually hasn't been soon. And she posted an episode where she was talking about how her mother is healed. And truly, that testimony was mind blowing, because everything that I've heard ever since I've started to understand a narcissistic mother, an emotionally unavailable mother, a manipulator of a mother, a gaslighting mother, a belittling mother, an abusive mother. Ever since I've started to listen to people who speak about this, people who have experienced this, most of them, if not all of them, even Renika herself, the girl who shared the testimony, even herself, she used to say this, that there's little to no chance of these people changing. And for me, it made sense because I'm in my late 20s and I've been waiting for my mother to change. I've been a good girl to my mother. And not to say if my mother was loving and attentive, I shouldn't have been a good girl or I shouldn't have been respectful. But I think for me, I did it more out of wanting her to love me. It was more from a place that, okay, if I'm super respectful, if I do my chores right, if I impress my mother, if I'm a good girl, then she will love me. So for me, it was mainly from that place that I just wanted my mother to love me, to see me, to value me, and I never got it. And so for me, when I would hear most of these people saying that there's little to no chance of a narcissistic mother changing, I understood that. And I took it as is because I'm seeing that, hey, I'm getting older and my mother is not changing. And she's showing no signs of changing. In fact, I think she's actually even getting worse because even her manipulation tactics have changed. And she, as we grow, and she sees that now it's harder to manipulate us because it's easier to manipulate, children. As she sees that it's harder to manipulate us, or it's harder to say certain things to us, or it's harder to be verbally abusive, even though she obviously wouldn't say she's a manipulative person or verbally abusive person. Obviously in her mind she's just thinking she's doing what any mother is would do, or saying what any mother would say, not with the slightest clue in her head that what she often says to us is hurtful and how she often behaves towards us is hurtful. And so seeing that my mother is just not changing all this time, and in fact her ways of manipulation are changing, her ways of being emotionally abusive are changing, her narcissism is changing as we grow, in order for her to still maintain some control, I guess, in our life, and I guess also instill some fear in us. That I don't know, but I took it as it is when people say just they're not going to change. And here comes Renika with an amazing testimony that her mother has changed and is in the process of changing, because it's not going to happen overnight. So with her situation, her and her mother, they haven't talked in 2 years because Renika tried, like I have tried many times. She often tried to tell her mother what would upset her, how she didn't like maybe when her mother spoke to her in a certain way, or some of the things that she would say, or how she would make her feel. And her mother was just not understanding it. Just like most narcissistic mothers, just like my own mother, whenever I say something, instead of my mother hearing me and seeing my pain, she just often sees it as an attack. If I tell my mother what she did or what she said that upset me, my mother can never just take a moment and think about it, or even just apologize, because sometimes you might think, oh, I didn't mean to hurt you. But if someone says it hurt me, the onus is now on you to apologize, because even if you don't think you were being hurtful, but if I actually say to you that was actually hurtful, then you need to apologize, and then stop doing that. If to you, maybe it's just a joke. If to you, it's not that serious. But if I say it hurts me, it's you just have to stop doing that, because clearly I don't like it. But every time I would say anything that upset me that my mother did or said, she would just see it as an attack on her being a mother, and she would say that she no longer knows how to communicate with me because I take jokes too seriously, or I take everything too hard. I would become the problem. Me, the person who's hurt, I would become the problem instead of her genuinely apologizing. And then she would give this insincere apology. just for the sake of apologizing. Then she'll say, oh, I'm sorry if that hurt you. The apology that's just like, I'm gonna say it because like you need me to say it, or I'm gonna say it to end this conversation. That's the kind of apology that my mother would give. And so Renika dealt with that situation for also a long time. And then she then decided she was fed up. She decided to cut all ties with her mother and go no contact because she was protecting herself. And this is another thing that people don't understand sometimes when you cut them out of your life, because especially if you've talked to someone, for me, it's always just a matter of talk to someone before you cut them out of your life. I think it's also unhealthy to just block people or cut them out without necessarily talking to them, because you don't know if maybe they would have changed. You don't know what their response would have been. But if you have tried to talk to them, you have tried to communicate your feelings and how you feel about certain things they do or say or their behavior, and you see that there's no change here, you have all the rights in the world to cut that person out of your life. And now, because people are so ingenuine, so people just they like living a fake life because that's what they prefer and makes sense to them. People will often say to you, oh, how could you cut out your own mother in your life? How could you no longer speak to your mother? Because they probably in a position where they have learned to tolerate or bear the pain that their own mother causes them. Or they probably just have a healthy mother, so they don't know what you are talking about. So it's one of the two. Sometimes people blame you for walking away from a situation simply because they don't have the courage to walk away from their own situation. So they will throw words at you like, how could you just not talk to your mother? At the end of the day, she's your mother. But if you really look deeply, they actually just have the same issue, but they don't have the courage to walk away. They think tolerating the pain that their mother causes them is respect, and it's not respect. Tolerating someone's pain in your life, like tolerating someone hurting you, is not love, it's not respect. It actually says more about your well-being and your state of mind, that you think so low of yourself that you think you should be tolerating this much hurt, that you should be tolerating all the BS that this person throws at you. And so Renika decided to cut all ties with her mother, and for 2 years they haven't spoken. And so she was sharing her testimony about how one day she was just spending time with the Lord, and the Spirit said to her, you need to get in contact with your mother. And she prayed about that, because sometimes you can think it's the Spirit, but no, maybe it's just your thoughts. And she prayed about that, and she asked, Lord, is that really you? Are you saying that I should contact my mother? Because I've been protecting myself from her. She hasn't been changing, because obviously she was still scared to get back in contact with her mother. And she prayed about it, and she said she felt a certain peace about it, and she decided to reach out to her mother. And lo and behold, her mother actually was going through a transformative season in her own life. So they met up, and her mother told her that the first year of them not talking to each other, she was just angry at Renika because she didn't understand, why she had decided to cut ties with her. She didn't understand all the things that Renika, all the frustrations and the sadness and the pain that Renika would always try to explain to her narcissistic mother. But then Renika's mother says that in the second year of them not talking, she actually started praying and asking God genuinely, like, what have I done to my daughter that she no longer wants to talk to me? And because the Lord is faithful, listen, the Lord is so faithful that if we really lay our hearts out to Him and we really seek His face and we ask and we really want to know, what have we done wrong? The thing is, most of us pray, but we don't really want to see our own flaws or mistakes. we don't really want to be pointed out, how wrong we are. And so we often just pray like for other people, or that, we forgive other people, but we don't really sometimes take the moment to have that genuine prayer where we say, Lord, am I wrong in this situation? Like, what have I done wrong? Why do people keep leaving me? Why does this happen to me? Because most times we keep blaming other people. For example, if you have dated guys and they always end up ghosting you, or they always end up dumping you, you keep praying, Lord, help me to forgive those guys, help me to find the right guy. But maybe you should be asking, Lord, is there something wrong with me? And not from a place of trying to be good so that you find the next guy, but from a place where the Lord can purify you and sanctify you, and you can come before Him and say, hey, maybe in these relationships, I'm a bully and I don't see that. Maybe I'm a control freak and I don't see that. And that's why my relationships end the way that they do. So I need to work on myself for myself, and not just because I want to marry a guy. Sure, it will be great when you find a guy and you are no longer a bully and you are no longer a control freak, but we need to work on ourselves for ourselves and not for other people. And I think for the longest time, that's what I did. I worked on myself for other people so that I can be impressive, so that I can be good, so that people can see how much of a great person I am. I didn't do it for myself. And I'm coming to a point where I'm now learning to do it for myself, that what, I actually want to be a good person for myself. I want to be proud of who I am. I want the Lord to be proud of who I am. And so Renika meets up with her mother, and her mother tells her all of this, that she's been doing the work. The Lord spoke to her, and she started going back to Renika's emails and their text messages, and she started looking back and she started praying about it and realizing how much she had hurt her daughter and how much she had never really seen and loved her daughter. And what really blew my mind away in this testimony is that Renika says her mother even just went as far as writing a letter for her. So they met up, they talked, and then her mother gave her a letter and said, please read this in your quiet time. And so when Renika got back to her place, she read the letter, and her mother, this was a beautiful miracle. Excuse me. And her mother had written all the times she has hurt her or didn't see her. And in Renika's words, she said her mother touched on every wound and apologized for that. And that just really touched me, how God can transform a person so much so that they can even see and recognize things from the past that they didn't see, that were hurtful to you. And Renika's mother, through her healing process, through her asking God to reveal this to her, she was able to even see back to times where she hurt Renika by not loving her, by not really being there for her, by not really seeing her, by not really valuing her, by making her feel like she's not good enough. She was able to see all those things, and she touched all those wounds and apologized to her daughter. And this is such an amazing testimony, and I'm happy for Renika. And it's crazy because when I first saw this podcast, I was a bit bummed out, because in my mind I thought, oh my goodness, Renika has a testimony that her mother has been healed, so she's no longer going to make any episodes for us, but she will still make episodes, so it's fine. I had conflicting feelings, because I think I was kind of jealous of the fact that her mother can be healed, because I had already believed that, okay, these people are never going to change. But then who am I to say that when we believe in a God who can do anything, what is impossible with men is possible with God? And it's crazy that we as Christians can say these things to each other. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. God can change any situation. And then sometimes we don't believe him to change situations. Like people say, God can do anything. Nothing is impossible with God. And then God can actually make a person who's been in a wheelchair all their lives, they were born like that, walk. And then people say, no, that's just not possible. But you like, but you said all things are possible with God. God heals a blind man. Literally, the man can see. People say, no, that wouldn't happen. But you say, like, why do we say these things and then contradict ourselves? People say, like, God can heal, and then somebody comes and testifies and says, I was HIV positive and now I don't have HIV. And then people are like, no, that's not possible. Science says this, science this. And I'm not fighting science. Science is great, it helps in a lot of areas. But when it comes to science rejecting the miracles of God, that's where I'm saying no. That's where I stop with science. I love the things that they have done for us, but that's where it stops with me when it comes to science rejecting the miracles that God can do. And so I think it was the same thing for me with, like, I know all things are possible with God. But hearing Renika's testimony, it made me realize that I actually didn't think it was possible for someone so tied up in their own world, so caught up in who they are that they see everybody else wrong and never themselves. I didn't really think it was possible for someone like that to heal. And especially because I've heard it 1,000 times that people say these people have little chance of changing. And there was Renika with her testimony. And it was just amazing. Obviously, her mother is still in the process and they're just going to take it one day at a time. But after listening to this podcast, I didn't walk out from it and say, you know what, I believe that for my mother. And my mother is also going to get her miraculous healing and she's going to change. She's going to start seeing me. She's going to start loving me. She's going to start truly hearing me. No, I actually still don't believe that for my mother. I believe it happened for Renika, and I'm amazed that it happened, and I'm happy for her. And I thank the Lord for her testimony. But I think I've hoped for so long that my mother would see me and love me and really be there for me that I can no longer do that to myself. It hurts. It hurts for me to hope again. So even after I heard her miracle and I believed every word she said, because it was even in her voice, like there was a moment where Renika just almost cried because you could tell that she was also in disbelief of what was happening because she saw her mother and she saw the change. She even mentioned that as she stepped into the coffee shop where they were meeting, she saw a different woman. And you know, because there's that given feeling in you, that God-given feeling that we know something is true. And she looked at her mother and she saw a different woman. And I believe that for Renika. I believed it has happened for her mother. I believe her mother and her, they're going to start a new relationship. But I just don't believe it for my mother. Not anymore. And I can't open up that door now, because it hurts. It has been hurting me all my life to keep hoping that my mother would be kinder and sweeter and nicer and more loving and more affectionate and more supportive. It has been hurting me to keep on hoping for those things and seeing those things not happening. So no, I cannot hope anymore for my mother to be different.